Today I want to do a video that's a little different in the sense that I try to keep weapons videos limited to what you don't see every day on YouTube. And recently I've been called and asked questions a lot about the BM59. And most of the BM59s you see in the United States are not actually real BM59s. They're an Americanized version of the BM59. I have two versions I'm going to show you. I'm going to do a little close-ups of the receivers, so hopefully you'll understand what they are. And when you go to bid on one of the web pages or something like that, you're not bidding on it like it's a Beretta BM59, which is worth 3 to 4 times as much. First of all, I have a Golden State BM59. Golden State was probably the first company in the United States to start making BM59s. Some of them actually say on the side, and this one does, licensed by Beretta. I don't know why Beretta would do that. I don't know if they did do that. I wasn't around at the time. But it's certainly not the quality of a factory Beretta BM59. The only thing, it has a few minor parts in common with a Beretta BM59, one of them being the magazines and the overall style of the gun, but the weapon itself is nowhere near the quality of a Beretta BM59. Still a good gun. I still love to shoot them. As a matter of fact, they've got me hooked on them enough that if I had the money, I'd buy a Beretta BM59. But I'll make do with what I can afford. As I said, this one's from Golden State. As you can see, this one has almost the squad automatic weapons configuration with the pistol grip, the drop-down stock, the extreme rubber butt pad, has a cutout, has a muzzle compensator brake. First thing you should know about all Americanized BM59s is the gas tube assembly. Right here is a standard M1 Garand gas tube assembly. On a Beretta, the gas tube, there's a space, so the op rod is not bent. So if you have one of these and you break apart and you want to say, I'll just get a Beretta BM59 from, say, Gun Parts, no, parts don't interchange. You have to get the parts specifically made for this weapon. And if you can't find them, you have to have them made. So that's one of the reasons these are less expensive. But they shoot good. Every now and then you'll see one that just simply won't function. It probably didn't function when it left the factory back in the 60s. If it functions, I haven't had any trouble with either one of these. The second one I have is a National Ordinance Bm59. As you can see, this one's just basically has a cut down M1 stock, which still has the metal butt pad. Has a different flash hider on the top of it. Compensator versus like a pencil flash hider. And this one's blued. Well, I guess they're both blued, but this one has a much nicer blue. Again, it uses the bent gas rod system here to fit the standard M1 gas piston assembly. Now, the big difference between these two is this one. And most of them I've seen, and of course, as in anything in the gun business, there's always something that's different. This one, the Golden State, is a re-welded M1 Garand receiver. You can tell that when I show you the pictures because the serial number is actually from a Garand, and you can see where the government manufacturer was ground off the top of the receiver. Then they engraved their markings on the side. Also, which I hope you'll be able to see on close-up, right in here you'll see where the receiver was re-welded. Not saying it's bad, not saying it won't work. Won't say, obviously the gun's 50 years old, it held up. I'm just telling you, when you're buying one on the internet, you need to look for all this because it adds a big difference. From an original Beretta, or I believe even a Springfield Armory BM59s used solid receivers that were built as BM59 receivers, not M1 Garand receivers that were converted over. Not saying there's anything wrong with that, it's just something that affects the value. The National Ordinance one, at least this one, and again, I can't vouch for all National Ordinances, you have to look at the individual weapons. This is a cast receiver. It was cast as one piece and then milled out and finished. The engraving on the National Ordinance one, which again is at the top of the receiver, is much better than on the Golden State, and it's a new style engraving. In other words, they didn't take a M1 receiver, grind the numbers off. They actually just rolled their own numbers into it. Something again to look for. I will field strip this one for you. It comes apart pretty easy to show you how you do it, and then I'll show you a close-up. But when you go to buy these guns, you have to be aware of these little idiosyncrasies, because if you don't, you're going to pay too much for the gun. It's not like people undercharge for guns like this. This is the side of the Golden State BM59. As you can see, the gray engraving where it says licensed by Beretta. If you come down the weapon, slide it down, you'll see the Golden State markings here. Also, if you slide the weapon this way, I'm going to roll it over. It's difficult to see, but right here is where the receiver was re-welded. There's a little divot. And finally, on the top of the receiver, you can see where you had the government serial number from the cut receiver, and you can see in here that where it's coarse, where they took a grinder and they ground off whether it's at Winchester or Springfield Armory. So if you look at a gun on the internet and it has these features, you know it's a re-welded M1 Garand receiver made by Golden State and bid on it appropriately. This is the National Ordinance receiver's markings. Now, first of all, there's no receiver markings on the side like there were on the Golden State. It's just bare metal. But as you can see, this is engraved very similar to the government markings. It's not lightly engraved, and there's no part where they ground the serial numbers off or the manufacturer's mark here. And when they engraved this all at one time. And the font between the serial number and the name is the same. Again, look for this. If you get a re-welded, if you find a National Ordinance gun that has a re-welded receiver, it will not have markings like this. It'll have markings similar to the Golden State receiver. And if up on the top of the receiver there isn't going to be the noticeable re-weld joint. Again, be careful what you bid on. I'm going to field strip a National Ordinance BM59 for you. Just like any other weapon. Here's the safety, by the way. I strip these guns with the safety off. I just always have. I've always stripped my Garands with the safety off. First, you want to make sure the weapon's empty. Weapon's empty. Just like an M1 Garand, you pull back on the trigger guard, lift it up, and it will free up the trigger guard from the receiver, and then you have to wiggle it out. Now on this particular weapon, since it is a modified Garand, you have all this extra wood that's taken out. Don't worry about it, it won't affect it. It just makes it a little difficult to put the trigger assembly back in. You have to have it lined up. Like a Garand, separate the lower rifle stock from the receiver upper. This is where it differs from a Garand. This little block here, there's a pin in it. If you push on that pin, right here there's a retaining pin. If you push on this spring, you will allow to be push that retaining pin through. Retaining pin comes out. That frees this whole system up, which gives you your recoil spring. This part that the recoil spring, the guide, which is notched, which also acts as the front catch for the magazine, and this block. It's my understanding, since I don't have a Beretta BM59 to compare, that these parts are not Beretta parts. These are National Ordinance parts. And if you lose these parts, you're going to have one made, because there are no spares. Now, to take the guide rod off, it's like a Garand. You bring it back to the slot and lift it out. But since the guide rod is so short, the op rod is so short, pardon me, it comes right apart. It comes right out. And finally, you have to take the bolt out. And it comes out like an M1A bolt or an M14 bolt or an M1 bolt. And if you look at this bolt here is actually a Springfield Armory bolt. It's a Garand bolt where they've cut a little bit of clearance off of it so it'll clear the BM59 magazines. Put it back together in reverse order. Now this is where it's a little bit of a trick. This piece has to be right because this cut has to allow this pin to go through. So when you put it in, it sometimes is difficult to line it up and can be very frustrating. In this case, I've caught the block, but I haven't caught this little piece because it's not facing the right direction. So now it's through. Put the stock back on, just like a Garand stock. And I should have said this when I was apart. This is what makes it different than a Garand. This is for the magazine. And this shell makes it different. When you're converting it from a Garand receiver to a BM59, and there are several well-recognized gunsmiths that are doing that now, he's going to have to fabricate these parts to add it on. Because of the length, and as you can see this is so much shorter, you want to look for these locator notches and the appropriate little balls or pins on the trigger pack, and line them up and wiggle and fluster, and eventually they'll go in. You can lock the gun back in place. That's how you field strip a BM59. To take the gas system apart in the front, it's just like a Garand. You unscrew this, and if you want you can unscrew the flash hider off. I don't think it's really necessary, because once the gas tube is out you can clean this easily. Hopefully I did this right, hopefully I did this informatively, and hopefully it'll help you. Good luck if you're going to buy one of these. They're a joy, but you can be ripped off very easily.